Arizona Territory. Summer of 1882. A lone rancher named Jed Colter stares out across the desert from his weathered ranch house. In the distance, a dust cloud rises, the unmistakable sign of Apache warriors on the move. Jed's neighbors had already fled. The military told him to abandon his land and head to the fort. Every expert said the same thing. You can't stop the Apache. You can only run. But Jed Colter didn't run. Instead, he did something so unexpected, so seemingly insane, that when word reached the cavalry fort, officers laughed and declared him a dead man. 3 days later, those same officers would ride out to Colter's ranch expecting to find ruins and bodies. What they found instead would change frontier warfare forever. Let me paint you the picture of what Jed Colter was facing. The year 1882 was particularly brutal in the Arizona Territory. White Mountain Apache warriors, led by the fierce Natio Tisha, had just ambushed and killed 4 San Carlos policemen. The entire frontier was on alert. 14 companies of U.S. cavalry, over 700 soldiers, were deployed to chase down approximately 60 Apache warriors. Think about that ratio for a moment. 12 soldiers for every warrior. And they still couldn't catch them. Jed Colter's ranch sat on 640 acres of scrubland, anchored by one critical feature, a natural spring. In the desert, water isn't just valuable, it's survival itself. And right now, with summer temperatures reaching 110 degrees, every living thing within 50 miles knew exactly where that spring was located, including approximately 300 Apache warriors who were converging on the area, fleeing multiple cavalry units. Jed's ranch hands had already deserted. His wife and children were safely at the fort. He stood alone on his property with 3 rifles, a shotgun, about 200 rounds of ammunition, and one supposedly crazy idea. Before we get to what Jed did, we need to understand what everyone expected him to do, and why it wouldn't work. Barricade yourself in the house. Board up the windows. Keep your ammunition dry and your powder close. Hold out as long as you can, and pray the cavalry arrives before they burn you out. This was the standard playbook, and it had one fatal flaw. The Apache didn't fight by the European playbook. See, the Apache had been perfecting desert warfare for over 1,000 years. They knew something that took the U.S. military decades to fully understand. In the Southwest, time and patience beat firepower. They didn't need to storm a fortified position. They just waited. A man barricaded in his house might have ammunition, but does he have food? Water? Can he stay awake for days, while warriors take turns keeping watch? The answer was always no. Apache siege tactics were brutally effective. They'd surround a position, cut off escape routes, and then wait, sometimes for days. They'd fire the occasional shot to keep defenders awake and nervous. They'd start small fires to test reactions. They'd probe for weaknesses. And when the defenders were exhausted, dehydrated, and low on ammunition, that's when they struck. Between 1870 and 1886, dozens of ranches and homesteads were abandoned or destroyed using exactly these tactics. The Apache casualty rate? Often 0. The settler casualty rate? Almost always 100%. So when Jed Colter refused to either flee or barricade himself in his house, people thought he'd lost his mind. Instead of fortifying his house, Jed Colter spent 2 days doing something that seemed absolutely insane. He poisoned his own water supply. Well, sort of. Here's what he actually did. And this is where frontier ingenuity meets psychological warfare. Jed knew the Apache were coming for his spring. Water was the one resource they absolutely needed. He also knew something critical about Apache culture that most settlers didn't. Apache warriors had an almost supernatural respect for contaminated water sources. In Apache tradition, poisoning a water source wasn't just dishonorable, it was spiritually dangerous. It could bring curses on entire families. Warriors who knowingly drank from poisoned water risked supernatural consequences that went beyond physical death. So Jed created the most elaborate fake poisoning in frontier history. First, he slaughtered 3 of his cattle and dragged their carcasses to the spring. He let them sit in the summer heat for 36 hours. The smell alone would stop a man at 50 yards. Second, he mixed a concoction of native plants, jimsonweed, wild tobacco, and crushed oleander leaves, all genuinely toxic. He scattered these obviously and deliberately around the water source. Third, and this is the brilliant part, he erected Apache-style warning markers. Using techniques he'd learned from friendly Apache scouts, he created traditional pollution symbols, sticks arranged in specific patterns, rocks painted with warning colors, even carved symbols on nearby trees. These weren't random decorations. These were the exact markers Apache themselves would use to warn their own people about contaminated water. But here's the twist that made this genius instead of just clever. Jed left a secondary water source completely untouched, a smaller spring about 400 yards from his main house, partially hidden by rock formations. He made no attempt to defend it, mark it, or claim it. He just left it alone. On the third day, the Apache arrived. First came the scouts, 2 young warriors who approached cautiously, studying the terrain. They spotted the ranch house. They saw the obviously abandoned main spring with its rotting cattle and warning markers. And according to later accounts from Apache scouts who spoke with survivors, they also saw something else. A white man sitting calmly on his porch, rifle across his lap, making no attempt to hide or fortify his position. The white man sat as if he had no fear. This made us cautious. A man with no fear is either protected by strong medicine or is setting a trap. The scouts reported back to the main war party. By evening, approximately 300 Apache warriors had the ranch surrounded. But something was wrong, from the Apache perspective. The poisoned spring was obvious. Too obvious. The warning markers were correct, but why would a white man use Apache symbols? Why would he poison the very water he himself needed? And why was he still sitting on his porch, not taking defensive positions? Apache warfare wasn't about blind charges and overwhelming force. It was about reading situations, understanding intentions, and avoiding traps. And this whole situation screamed trap. For 36 hours, Jed Colter and 300 Apache warriors existed in the strangest standoff in frontier history. The warriors didn't attack. Jed didn't fire. Both sides watched each other. But here's what was happening beneath the surface. Apache scouts had found the secondary spring. They tested it cautiously. It was clean, unguarded, perfect, and that made them even more suspicious. Why would he poison one spring but leave another clean and undefended? We believed the clean spring was the real trap. We believed he wanted us to drink there, where he could ambush us, or where the water was poisoned with something we could not see or smell. Meanwhile, Jed kept up his performance. Every few hours, he'd walk to his well, a different water source entirely, hand-dug behind his house, and draw up fresh water. He'd drink it in plain sight of any watchers. He'd splash it on his face. He'd water his remaining horse. The message was clear. I have water. I don't need your springs. And I'm not going anywhere. Here's where we need to understand something crucial about Apache tactical thinking. The Apache weren't mindless raiders. They were sophisticated strategists who evaluated risk versus reward constantly. A battle that cost lives, even a winning battle, was considered a failure if the objective could be achieved without casualties. And right now, the math wasn't adding up. Yes, they could probably overrun one man. But the water sources were potentially compromised. The situation felt like a trap. U.S. cavalry units were actively searching the area. Every hour spent here was an hour not spent moving to safer territory. Plus, there was another factor, respect. In Apache culture, courage was the highest virtue. A warrior who stood alone against overwhelming odds, showing no fear, earned respect, even from enemies. And there were rules, often unspoken, about how such courage should be acknowledged. Jed Colter, sitting calmly on his porch for 3 days, while 300 warriors surrounded him, was demonstrating either supreme courage or had protection from powerful medicine. Either way, attacking him directly seemed increasingly unwise. On the morning of the 4th day, Jed woke to silence. The Apache were gone. Not scattered, gone. Moved as a unified force to continue their journey, avoiding the entire area around Colter's ranch. They'd bypass his springs entirely, choosing instead to push their warriors hard to reach water sources further north, adding 20 miles to their route. When cavalry units arrived that afternoon, expecting to find Apache warriors to fight, They instead found Jed Colter alive and well, his ranch intact, and his springs unused. Colter informed us that approximately 300 hostiles had surrounded his position for 3 days, but departed without engaging. We inspected his defenses and found them inadequate for withstanding any determined assault. When asked how he survived, Colter stated he made the water not worth fighting for. The Indians evidently agreed. Word of Colter's strategy spread through both military and Apache communities. In the following months, several other ranchers attempted similar tactics with varying success. The U.S. Army even documented the technique in their frontier warfare manuals. But here's what really mattered. Jed Colter had figured out something that traditional military thinking missed. The genius of Jed Colter's trap wasn't that it physically stopped the Apache. It couldn't. One man can't stop 300 warriors with force. The genius was that it changed the calculation. He didn't try to defeat them. He tried to make victory not worth the cost. He didn't try to kill them. He tried to make his position too uncertain, too risky, and too time-consuming to be worth their while. In modern military terminology, we call this asymmetric warfare, or denial of resources. But Jed Colter just called it, making them want to go somewhere else. The poison springs created physical barriers. The warning markers showed respect for Apache culture. The calm demeanor demonstrated that he wasn't operating from fear. And the secondary clean spring created enough doubt about the entire situation that the risk-reward calculation shifted. Most importantly, he understood his enemy. The Apache weren't mindless savages bent on random destruction, the racist narrative popular in 1880s newspapers. They were sophisticated tacticians making calculated decisions about resource allocation, risk management, and strategic positioning. Jed didn't beat them through superior firepower. He beat them by understanding their decision-making process and manipulating the variables that influenced it. Jed Colter ranched that land for another 23 years. His story became frontier legend, told and retold with increasing embellishment. Some versions claimed he single-handedly defeated 500 warriors. Others said he used black magic or made deals with Apache shamans. The truth was simpler and somehow more impressive. One man, understanding his enemy better than his own military did, created a situation where the most logical choice for 300 Apache warriors was to leave him alone. Years later, when reservations were established and many Apache were forced to relocate, several Apache elders were interviewed about the frontier warfare period. When asked about Colter's ranch, one elder, name lost to history, stated, "The man who poisoned his own water showed he would rather die than surrender his land. A man willing to poison his own water would use any weapon, fight by any means. Such men are dangerous to fight. Better to find water elsewhere and let him keep his poison ground." The Apache saw Colter's act not as a clever trick, but as a declaration of total commitment, and they respected that enough to find another path. Today, Jed Colter's ranch is long gone, returned to desert scrubland. The springs still flow, clean and unpoisoned, used now by wildlife and the occasional hiker who doesn't know they're standing on a battleground where a battle never happened. But the lesson remains. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to change what the fight is about. Sometimes the smartest trap isn't one that catches your enemy. It's one that convinces them they don't want to be caught. The military called Jed Colter's plan crazy because it violated every principle of defensive warfare they knew. But it worked because it violated every principle of Apache offensive warfare too. In the gap between those two doctrines, one clever rancher found his path to survival. 300 Apache warriors. One rancher. 0 casualties on either side. In the violent history of the Apache Wars, where thousands died in battles large and small, perhaps the greatest victory was the one where nobody had to die at all. Because the real trap wasn't in the poison springs or the warning markers. The real trap was making victory cost more than it was worth.